Good morning to everybody. Welcome to today's Sports Philanthropy webinar. My name is Roy Kessel. I'm the founder of the Sports Philanthropy Network, and on behalf of the network, myself and Kayla Bradham, who's here, VP of Community Development, I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar. We're happy to have with us Darren Sudman, who is the founder of Simon's Heart, and he'll tell you more about his background and what led him to start the organization. I know we're going to have more people joining in here as we get going. I think that this is a really important topic. I know I had a lot of people who expressed interest in participating that just weren't able to fit today in their schedule, but I know are going to go back and watch. So I think this is going to be a great resource for a lot of organizations to address a really interesting topic. I want to make sure that we try and encourage everybody, if they can, to participate by video. It's always more fun and engaging to see people and interact directly. We will be sending out a survey after the webinar to get your feedback and to see what additional topics you'd like to have us cover as we go through what looks to be a continuing and ongoing lockout. We're going to have things scheduled at least through the end of May, and depending on where society looks like it's going after that, we always intended to have a weekly webinar going anyway, even before this started. So we'll certainly do it at least weekly beyond the end of the COVID crisis. I encourage you to look at the rest of our schedule. We've had some fantastic podcasts going all the way back to last year. I know Darren was on with us last year, and we continue to get great guests, very engaging, terrific opportunity to learn from organizations around the country of every different type. We put out our weekly newsstand on Mondays that's got an update on all kinds of events going on, a lot of the news in this space, and terrific articles that come out about the sports philanthropy world. We also created a COVID-19 sports resource page that has all kinds of information that's available, some free programs, ways to engage participants, and we encourage you to take a look at those. And of course, the easiest way to follow ongoing updates on a regular basis is on our social media channels. We're pretty easy to find everywhere: LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. And we appreciate your support and your participation here. I think one of the most important parts to me of creating these webinars is giving everybody the opportunity to connect and engage with other people in the network. So I'd like to have everybody go and just do a brief introduction so we know where you're from, what area, and what organization. And then we can make sure that you have an opportunity to connect with other people that are here and learn a little bit more about what kind of stuff you're doing. So Kayla, do you want to start?
Sure. Good morning, everybody. I'm Kayla Bradham, Vice President of Community Development with the Sports Philanthropy Network, here with my newly 6-year-old son, Ezekiel.
Thank you. Joe?
Hey, I'm Joe Bird. I'm with Chicago Training Center. We're a free rowing program, 6th through 12th grade in Chicago, Illinois. I'm a coach and I'm on the board.
Fantastic. Brandon?
Hello, I'm Brandon. I'm a board member of Boys Harnett Track, a student / board-run organization where we teach leadership skills and life skills in the South Towns, but we are reaching out to other places in the areas around the rail. Okay. But right now we're in the South Towns.
Thank you. Dave?
Hi, Dave Fritchie. I'm VP of Business Development for SaveStation and StatPads, a couple firms that work with not-for-profits specifically around sudden cardiac arrest and placement of AEDs and awareness.
Glad you could be with us. Doug?
My name is Doug Garner. I'm at University of Texas Arlington. I run our adapted sports program. I coach our men's wheelchair basketball team.
And Doug's going to be one of our featured presenters for the town hall meeting on adaptive sports that we're holding on Friday. So if you've got any organizations or contacts relating to adaptive sports, we encourage you to have them participate on Friday. Erica?
Good morning, this is Erica. I am instructor in Chicago with Aerostar, and we teach underprivileged youth about aviation. Thank you.
Terrific. Martha? Okay. Well, we'll get Martha when maybe she'll jump back on here when she gets an opportunity. So I want to thank Darren for coming on. Darren and I have known each other probably over 10 years now since we first met, and he'll share more of his story with you, but he's done an amazing job with Simon's Heart, really bringing a lot of attention to the issue of sudden cardiac arrest and heart screenings, and the challenges that poses for the sports community, and really discuss some of the ways that we can take the work that's being done out there, not only by Darren, but by other groups around the country, and elevate this issue to where it belongs on the national landscape. If you look at how much money is spent in sports on every type of uniform, piece of equipment, practice, everything that goes on, and yet none of those things are going to matter if the kids are not alive to play. And you've got something that in the scheme of what gets spent on a per head basis is a relatively inexpensive way to go through the process. It's not necessarily easy, and it's certainly got a lot of people involved in that process. But I think as a community, we need to look at the sports world and say, why are we not taking these things more seriously? Why is this not something that's mandated across the board? And Darren, I'm going to turn it over to you to go through your presentation. I'll set this screen share up so you can go ahead and make sure that you can jump on there and do the screen share whenever you want. And then we'll certainly have time at the end for questions. I think as Darren's going through it, we're certainly open to questions along the way. I would encourage you to just do that in the chat, and that way it'll make it a little easier for me to help Darren fit those into the flow of the conversation. So Darren, take it away.
Thank you, Roy, and thanks for allowing us to talk about this issue in one of your webinars. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, great. And I've been on these before, but I've never shared a presentation. So let's see how this works.
That worked well.
Okay, good. And you can just see the presentation, none of the other clutter on my desktop?
Correct.
Okay, perfect. So first of all, I was supposed to be presenting with Sheldon Hill, who is the executive director of SafeBeat. Unfortunately, he's had a couple family things back to back and could not attend. So if any of you are Sheldon fans and showed up for him, I apologize. He won't be here. But Sheldon and I work pretty closely together. And I think we'll still be able to give you guys a good idea about youth heart screenings, what they do, what they're for, and maybe how you can get connected with a group that does youth heart screenings. So to start us off, I just wanted to quickly show a video so that everyone can appreciate really what we're talking about here and the importance of detecting heart conditions in our children. This was a video produced by the American Heart Association.
This is where I go to school. You guys, this is where I I keep my book. You're not supposed to see this. This is where I take math. This is where I like to study. This is where I grab the spotlight. And this is where I died.
So that illustrates the issue that we're going to be talking about today, which is students of all ages, but probably ages 12 to 19 are stricken with sudden cardiac arrest, and they collapse and die suddenly from undetected heart conditions. That was obviously caught on video, so even though it's a bit dated, it's a good illustration of what we're up against and what we're trying to prevent. And that's what we'll be covering here today. So just to give you a little bit of background real quick, Simon's Heart was started back in 2005. Simon was my 3-month-old son, and he was sleeping and didn't wake up. After that, my wife was evaluated, both of us were, and she discovered she had a heart condition called long QT syndrome. It's an arrhythmia, and it has been linked to up to 15% of all SIDS deaths. And it's also one of a handful of conditions that can cause students, particularly student athletes, to collapse and die. So we started Simon's Heart and started providing free heart screenings, and since then have expanded what we do to cover different areas, different ways to prevent sudden cardiac arrest and death in kids. And even though Sheldon isn't with us, I wanted to just let you know that SafeBeat was founded by Jane Vining in memory of her son, Mark, who died of sudden cardiac arrest as well. SafeBeat's been around for a while. Sheldon Hill works for GE in their cardiovascular unit, and he serves as executive director. And SafeBeat is primarily engaged in heart screenings in the South Georgia, North Florida area. So this is kind of what we're all about. Anyone who is engaged in heart screenings or distributing AED devices or teaching CPR, we don't want other parents to lose their child to a detectable and treatable heart condition. And every year we're reminded when we get Google alerts or open up the newspaper that students are collapsing and dying from detectable and treatable heart conditions. So let's get our head around real quick sudden cardiac arrest. So sudden cardiac arrest is what happens when your heart stops beating suddenly and unexpectedly. You're engaged in any kind of activity, whether it's sleeping or playing, and you just collapse. That's it. It's different from a heart attack, which is something that can onset slowly. You can feel some discomfort. It can be happening for days. But cardiac arrest is pretty abrupt. You know when it happens. It's the leading cause of death of adults in this country. It's the #1 cause of death of student athletes, and it takes the lives of thousands of children every year. And heart conditions are the leading birth defect. So as human beings, we have a lot to deal with when it comes to the heart. It's really important, and it's pretty fragile, even though it beats continuously from the minute we're born until the day we die. So in my opinion, it's something that we should probably take a closer look at earlier instead of waiting until we are 40 or 50 and we're getting life insurance or symptomatic. So let's look at the odds a little bit as to what kind of problem we're dealing with. So I've provided you with some odds on maybe some things you've thought about, winning the Mega Millions or becoming president or being struck by lightning. And then I've provided you with some stats from research that's been conducted. So as you can see, the odds of winning the lottery or becoming president or being struck by lightning are pretty slim. But then when you move down into the research, it shows that NCAA athletes have a 1 in 44,000 chance of experiencing sudden cardiac arrest. And that is even more intense when you look at Division I male basketball players. They have a 1 in 3,100 chance of experiencing sudden cardiac arrest. So we're not talking about something that is really that rare. But before we dive in and talk about heart screenings and why we think it's important, I think we need to first look at some of the things that our children are already being subjected to, some things that are already being examined. And I can speak very well to Pennsylvania, kind of making an educated assumption for the other 49 states, but I'm pretty sure that every student in every state encounters some kind of hearing exam, BMI exam, and vision exam in school at some point between K through 12. And so obviously these are all very important indicators, very important functions, but we should keep in mind also the importance of the heart, the role that that plays in making sure that we can hear and see and live. States also require our kids to get annual wellness exams. These are things that need to be submitted to nurses at schools. But then for those students who are participating in sports, every state requires some version of a pre-participation sports physical, which asks our kids questions about how they're feeling, how they've felt in the past, what kind of things, ailments plague their family. And then that sometimes there's a physical that goes along with that. But I'm sure everyone on this webinar also knows of examples where someone drops off the form for their doctor, the student's not really examined, the form gets filled out, and it gets turned in. So it seems like these pre-participation sports physicals are a little bit more about jumping through a hurdle than taking the health and safety of our children seriously. So what is the standard of care right now for our kids when they go see a pediatrician, or if they go see a pediatrician, because not every student in this country has access to a wellness exam. And so it's kind of two-pronged. One is there are 14 questions that have been vetted and approved by the American Heart Association. They are on the left-hand side. It asks a little bit about your medical history. How do you feel? Does your chest hurt? Have you ever fainted? These are important questions to know. And then it asks about family history. Has anyone died suddenly under the age of 50? Anyone have cardiomyopathy in your family? These are all really relevant and important things to know about our health. And then there's a brief physical examination, listening to the heart, and looking for physical signs of a condition called Marfan syndrome. So over on the right, I just show a picture of a French physician who invented the stethoscope. And it's important to point out that the stethoscope was invented back in 1781. And not until the past couple of years have we seen digital stethoscopes kind of come onto the marketplace, and now being able to use them remotely as well. I think they're going to get a lot more traction. But the point I'm trying to make here is that the standard of care that we're providing to our children is a couple questions and a tool that is a few hundred years old. And I'm not sure that that is putting our best foot forward. So in order to change a standard of care, it's not enough for me to simply tell you what my opinion is or to share stories, but I think it is important for us to acknowledge what the stories tell us. And we saw a bunch of articles in the beginning of my presentation, but this story resonated with me. It's a couple years old, and it's about a girl. Her name is Crawford. She was 17 years old playing volleyball in Georgia. She had numerous annual wellness checks and sports physicals. She was a pretty good athlete. And in the middle of a match, as you can see in the footage, she collapsed. And the question I ask whenever I see a story or hear a story about a student who has collapsed and died, or collapsed and has been saved by cardiac arrest, I wonder how many questions she answered over her lifetime. And I wonder how many people listened to her heart, because in the medical community, we're really concerned about giving false information. And I think that the status quo is actually giving a lot of these kids false information. They and their families believe that they are fine and that there is nothing for them to worry about. And so again, I go back to the previous slide and say, maybe there's a little bit more that we can be doing. So in addition to the anecdotal evidence, we want to look at what the research tells us. And I'll just say up front that we haven't even come close to doing enough research in this area to know the real answers. How many kids have heart conditions? How pervasive is cardiac arrest among kids? What's the best way to do heart screenings? But of the research that has been done, it's been really instructive and persuasive. So this was a study that was done a few years back, and they looked at 5,000 student athletes across 35 NCAA institutions, and all of them received a sports physical that contained the medical and family history, which we've already discussed, a physical, which we've already discussed, and an EKG, electrocardiogram. And if you look at the bottom of the slide, you'll see that 13 of these students of 5,000 were diagnosed with heart conditions. One of them, the heart condition, was detected after a physical exam. 2 of them had their condition detected after a medical history. But the rest of them needed that EKG to find that heart condition. There were no warning signs, no indicators from the physical exam, the medical history, or the stethoscope to indicate that they had these heart conditions. So even though this is a relatively small study of 5,000 students, and there hasn't been a lot of research done in this space, I see something like this and it makes me really curious about what else is out there, and really curious about what this ECG thing is all about. And I think it's extra instructive when we think about what's going on around us in the midst of this COVID epidemic. And all of the public health experts are talking about testing and the need to know how widespread this disease is, who's getting it, who's transmitting it. Everything comes back to testing and knowing about the population. And I think while cardiac arrest among kids isn't as dire or imminent as what we're facing right now with COVID in a population, I don't think the standards change. I think we need to be curious and see what we're really looking at, how big the scope of the problem is. So what is the solution? So Simon's Heart and SafeBeat and several other organizations around the country believe that the solution is heart screenings, screening students of all kind, but particularly student athletes who might be of greater risk. And what you'll see is that there's a few ways to do these heart screenings, but I'm going to first tell you about what SafeBeat and Simon's Heart do. So we both do a medical and family history. We do a physical exam. We do an EKG exam and electrocardiogram. And then on the students that show through medical family history or an electrocardiogram that something might be wrong, we offer an echocardiogram, which is a sonogram of the heart. So let's review kind of what I discussed real quick. A history is examining what might exist in your family. And I am shocked on a daily basis when I find that people who have lost loved ones, whether they are over 50 and they died suddenly and unexpectedly, or the child is 3 months old and they died in their sleep, at how many of those people weren't asked questions that could provide a breadcrumb trail to maybe uncovering some kind of familial problem. One example I'll give you is I was at a health fair a long time ago, and a woman came up to my table. I had a CPR dummy on the table, and that's what she was drawn to. And she told me that her son lost a baby to SIDS. and we talked a little bit about my experience too. And then she left, and a little bit later, a young man came up to me and told me that he had a heart condition. And then it turns out the mom returned and, you know, placed her arms on the shoulders of that young man. And I realized that they were related, mother and son, and then talked to them more and realized that they had never had a conversation with a medical professional about the fact that he was born with a heart condition and that the baby died of SIDS. And so I go back to the word curiosity. I think that we need to be a lot more curious about the heart and the importance of it and the problems that can lie within it. So the physical exam in our screening includes a blood pressure, height, and weight. And then the electrocardiogram, I'm sure everyone has at least seen a printout or seen it done on TV or maybe even had it done. It's 12 stickers on your chest, arms, and legs. It reads the electrical current of your heart. And then the echocardiogram is very much like a sonogram that women get when they're pregnant. It looks at the structural conditions of your heart. So who should get screened? Obviously, we think everyone should. We think students who are about to come adolescents are going to be in the highest risk group, but more research needs to be done there. But there really isn't enough research to establish the ideal age, frequency, or most effective method of screening. The majority, though, of groups that do heart screenings and those who advocate for heart screenings think that they should become a standard of care and that we should probably look at kids between the ages of 14 and 25 because that is believed to be the highest risk group of kids. So let me show you a really quick video of what a heart screening might look like. So heart screenings take on all different shapes and sizes, but that's a quick look at one of our heart screenings. So I've already mentioned that we don't really know the best way to screen a kid's heart, but I wanted to kind of show you on this very unscientific graph, and I want to reiterate, this is a very unscientific graph of what could happen at a heart screening. Because at the end of the presentation, I'm going to show you a couple links that you can use to find heart screening groups in your community, but they're not all doing the same thing. So we've talked a lot about history. We've talked about the physical. We've talked about the ECG and the echo combined with the ECG. And so there are some groups that will just perform an EKG or ECG. I might use those words interchangeably. It's the same thing. That is just going to look at your heart for 6 to 10 seconds, period. Then there are groups that might add in a history to that, groups that add in a history and physical to that. There are some groups that only do echocardiograms. There are some groups that do echo plus ECG. And there's pros and cons to each of these approaches. And again, I'll stress that we don't know the best approach yet because we haven't done enough research to determine it. But what I wanted to try to reveal on this graph is that what we have to consider is the reliability of each of these things individually and collectively, but then also the cost. Because until we assess all of these things by both of those metrics, we're not going to know what the most effective is. So for instance, if I had all the resources in the world and could give every student an echo, an ECG, a physical, and a history, I know that I would be doing the most comprehensive test and I would have the greatest chance of finding every condition. I wouldn't have a 100% chance, but it would put me at the greatest chance. but that's my most expensive option. That's the most resource intensive option. So I can't say that that's the most effective option, even though it's the most revealing option. And so hopefully as we do some research and as we collaborate more, we'll be able to figure out where we're going to end up on this graph. What's the most scalable, efficient, and effective? So in addition to doing heart screenings, you've heard me use the word research a lot. A few years back, Simon's Heart built a digital registry called HeartBites. And we did this because when Simon first died, we just wanted to get out the door testing so that we could prevent one family from losing another child. And as you can imagine, it felt really good to meet a family who would get an examination and their child would find a condition and the family and the child would think that they were both on a better path for their life. But we learned after a few years that those stories, although they feel good and they're great to tell people, aren't going to change the standard of care. In order for all kids to get their hearts checked, we're going to need data. And we wanted to be a part of that solution. So we built this digital registry, and now Simon's Heart and SafeBeat and a couple other organizations use this platform at their heart screenings. And what it allows us to do is quickly and easily gather all of the data points that I've mentioned to you, as well as the digital images from our EKGs and echoes, de-identify everything, and make it available to researchers for free. So if you're familiar with research, it's a pretty painstaking process where you have really smart academics who want to dig into data and start asking questions and providing answers, but they got to do these two really annoying things first. One is raise a lot of money with a grant, and two is gather all the data. So we're hoping that with HeartBites, we can let them skip those two steps and let them jump immediately into the research. We look at this as kind of like a free library for heart data on seemingly healthy kids. So we're excited because over the past 2 years, data from our platform has been used to create 7 abstracts that have been presented at heart and sports medicine conferences around the country. So I also want to point out a couple other things before we get into questions, is that I've talked about heart screenings, and that's a really good way, I think, of preventing sudden cardiac arrest. But we know that not every test or screen is 100% accurate. And there are other ways that we can help avoid tragedy. So I want to talk for a second about preventing sudden cardiac death. And 2 ways to do that are teaching our kids how to do chest compressions, or CPR, and then also making sure that there are AED devices where our kids learn and play. Because there aren't enough AED devices in public forums, and there definitely aren't enough AED devices in places where our kids learn and play. So there are a whole bunch of groups out there trying to bring CPR to schools. There is a law that has been passed, I believe, in 43 states, led by the American Heart Association, that brings some kind of CPR curriculum to schools. And then there's a bunch of groups that donate AED devices. We've taken a creative approach to both these problems. You'll see the photo on the left, some kids pressing on some red balls. So we created an activation called the Cpr Jukebox. And we invite families and kids attending music festivals and community fairs to come in and learn how to do compressions on balls, because they're fun and readily available and not creepy like a dummy might be. And they pick a song from our playlist, a modern song that they listen to and enjoy, and they just press on it to the beat of the song. And what this does is it gives them a fun experience, so that if they're ever faced with a tragedy, they might recall that fun experience and jump in and know how to start pushing, especially if they have the assistance of a 911 operator on the phone. And in terms of AEDs, we donate some AEDs, but what we're really excited about is a crowdfunding site that we developed called Got AED. And that is a way for a lot of youth facilities, youth organizations to easily raise about $900 so that they can get an AED and a cabinet for their venue. Unfortunately, there isn't enough money out there to just give AEDs to everybody who needs one and doesn't have a budget for one. So we thought this would be a valuable tool. And then finally, one of the things that we've been working hard at is raising awareness among coaches, parents, and student athletes. I'm sure everyone on the webinar knows about the concussion safety legislation that swept our country and now raises awareness among the coaches, parents, and student athletes, the warning signs and the symptoms and the requirement to remove a player who is symptomatic so that he or she can be cleared by a licensed medical professional. So what we did is we tried to use that, that wave and pass similar legislation to raise awareness about sudden cardiac arrest. And with the help of some other organizations, we've been able to get that passed in 14 states. You can see those reflected here. So that's another way to just bring awareness so that parents can then start to ask questions about heart screenings and AED placements and CPR trainings. So this concludes the formal part of my presentation. You can see the URLs for Simon's Heart and SafeBeat. And then I wanted to provide you with URLs to two other sites that can give you some insight as to what groups might be doing heart screenings in your area: Screen Across America and Parent Heart Watch.
Great, thanks, Darren. Obviously, we can open it up to questions now. I'll get this off the screen so we can see each other. And you know what I want to look at as we go through this process now is really engaging in a conversation and talking about what we can do collectively to help in this space. It sounds, Darren, like from what you were describing, cost is one of the big factors really on two fronts. One is the costs of the screenings. The second is the cost of the AEDs and cabinets. And I know that there's a wide variation on the screening cost depending on how much of that is supported by volunteer time, by equipment that's either donated or utilized from a medical facility versus having to transport other types of equipment. Maybe you can talk a little bit to that and sort of procedurally of what it takes to get it set up if somebody wants to do that at their school.
Yeah, so the cost is definitely a big factor. So is resource to medical personnel and equipment. You know, to plan a screening, you need the cardiologists who can read the EKGs and the echoes. You need, if you're going to provide a physical, you need the people who can take blood pressure, height, and weight, and listen to hearts. You obviously need a lot of lay people to help move the kids around to the different stations. You need the machines. You need the EKG machines and the echo machines. And so if you live in a city like Philadelphia, where I'm from, you have access to 3 pediatric hospitals and 5 medical institutions. You have a pretty good shot of cobbling together an effort like this. But if you live in a more remote part of the country, you might not be able to gather together the resources to pull off a heart screening. So it's very much a resource thing, but it's also a cost thing. You know, we really don't know what this cost is. I know that if I took my kids to a hospital or a clinic to get an EKG, I'd probably spend between $200 and $400. If I wanted an echo, I'd probably spend between $600 and $1,000. But we also know that we probably can't base this public health screening model on those kinds of costs because the cost structure is so messed up anyway. So we got to really figure out what it's going to cost. And I think what we'll realize is that having the machines, there's no cost in using it. There might be a cost in maintenance after you do it 1,000 times, but there's no cost in having it. So there's a small upfront cost, and then it's just figuring out how much we need to pay people to do the interpretations. But I'm a big believer that groups like Simon's Heart are not in this for the long run. That in order for this to become a standard of care and for all students to get their hearts checked, a group like Simon's Heart is here to prove a concept that this is a viable alternative, to help with the research to prove that it's an effective way to detect heart screenings, and then to be a big enough pain in the ass that the lawmakers and the policymakers say that we need to start including this in a child's healthcare analysis.
And I think you raised an interesting point when you put the map up and talked about the concussion legislation and things like that. And what's interesting, I think both areas have some similarities, which is there's a lot of, probably a lot more talk on the concussion front, because it's, even though it's technically sort of an invisible injury, the cause of the concussion is usually quite visible, right? It's usually a dramatic fall or an impact or something like that. You don't really get a concussion from an unknown issue, as
Correct.
opposed to the heart conditions. And so the people can really see where that's coming from and kind of feel that impact in a different way. And yet, despite all of the changes in the laws and requirements and everything, if you really look at the substance of what's going on the concussion front, it's still way below what I would classify, as you said, the standard of care in terms of what should be done for baseline concussion testing and for post-injury testing. But from a heart screening perspective, people don't see anything. There's no immediate call to action because people don't perceive that danger. And I think that one of the things that's interesting to me, especially as we're having this conversation now during the COVID crisis, we're doing a lot more things remotely. What would the challenge be in having and utilizing, as you said, cardiologists or other people to interpret some of that data and results remotely, rather than needing them to necessarily be on site for that process? Because I think as you identify ways to expand the reach, you talked about the lack of access in more remote or rural communities. Is it a possibility to have equipment that can be used to get the reading and have the interpretation done somewhere else?
Yeah, Roy, you highlight a path forward, like a solution where I think this is all headed. It is very tedious for a group like Simon's Heart to recruit 200 to 300 students to show up at a school on a weekend and bring all the equipment. Most of you have not seen a heart screening, but you probably have seen a blood drive. You see them in there setting up and tearing down, and it's tedious. But I think that you're right, and we're actually going to launch a pilot program this fall with a school, and actually Florida there's a couple counties in Florida that have mandated heart screenings for student athletes. So they're kind of working their way through this right now, but we're going to give the school a couple of EKG machines and teach their athletic trainers how to do it. And then cardiologists offsite are going to evaluate it. So I can totally see a world in which there are, let's just say, 50 cardiologists in each state who hang out in their house with a laptop, and all they do is receive ECG files and evaluate them, so that this kind of analysis, this kind of healthcare can be delivered at the micro level, even in the most remote places in our country.
So given your experience in seeing how these are set up, for most of us that don't know the time frame that's involved, right? So the process, maybe we can break down kind of the process of how long, once everything's set up, obviously we can't take setup time, but you've got the system set up at the school. How long do you need each student for in order to run either the EKG or the echo, not the other parts?
Oh, sure. Well, so actually, the longest part of the ECG is putting the stickers, the electrodes on in the right place. The test itself is 6 seconds, 10 seconds. So that's a 2 to 5 minute process, depending on how skilled the person is placing the ECGs and if the test looks good the first time it comes out. The echo is a little bit more involved. At these screenings, at most of the screenings, the echo that's given is about 5 to 10 minutes. But if you were to go into a clinic and get an echo, it would probably be 20 to 30 minutes because they're just going to look at many more things and record many more measurements. Roy, there were a couple questions that came in through chat. You want me to take those real quick?
Sure, go ahead.
All right, so Brandon, CPR and first aid training feels like people aren't getting the same thing and you might be getting cheated. So I'm going to give you a kind of an outlier answer because I think that my community has made it harder on itself to get people, one, to learn how to do compressions, and two, to not be scared to get involved if they see someone in distress. And so I'm not a big fan of CPR certification unless you're in a occupation that requires it. And I think that there are occupations where they should be certified. But for just people like me, maybe you, I don't know if you're in one of those occupations, all you really need to do is get a ball and push on it to a song that's 100 beats per minute, because all you are expected to do is buy time until a first responder shows up. And we're trying to pump blood through someone's body because their heart's not doing it. So, and I'm pretty confident that if people can learn the sensation of doing a compression, that they should be kneeling on the floor and their elbows should be locked and their hands should be clinched together. That's better than nothing. And I'd rather have them get in there and do better than nothing than worry about things like, I got to pay to get certified. My certification ended 2 months ago. Can I still do it? Like, we don't want people to go through their mind processing all these reasons that they shouldn't get engaged. We want them to get in because I think virtually every state has a Good Samaritan law that absolves anyone from liability if they jump into a situation like this. So yes, I agree with you. It's a little bit inconsistent, and I think that these certifications and these fees provide barriers. So I'm out there trying to just convince people to push a little bit on a ball so that they get the sensation and they're ready to go. Doug, any correlation in the data between gender or socioeconomic status? So of the limited research that's out there, we know that males are a little bit more likely to suffer cardiac arrest, and we know that African Americans are more likely to suffer cardiac arrest. And when I say suffer cardiac arrest, obviously they also are more likely to have the underlying heart conditions that lead to that stuff.
Darren, one of the other questions that I had as we were talking about the timing is, you discussed how long it takes to perform the test. So now you've got the data from the test, whether it's the EKG or the echo, and you're going to provide that to a cardiologist. Give us an estimate on a sort of per unit basis. How long does it take that cardiologist to go through that one file? You talked about somebody sitting at home. You know, how many of those could they get done in an hour?
So again, it varies. There's a group in Chicago that does a ridiculous number of ECGs in a sitting. And so they go through like 800 or 1,000 in a day. There are others. If you sit down with a pediatric electrophysiologist, which is a cardiologist who went to a little extra school for pediatrics, who went to a little extra school for evaluating the electrical rhythm of the heart, he or she might sit down with that same piece of paper, take out a thing called calipers, which look like a little compass from our geometry classes, and look at the measurements. And they might do it for 2-3 minutes. So I think it depends. But that's another thing that we as a screening community need to figure out. Like, is it acceptable to blow through these things because we're just looking for patterns, or do we need to be a little bit more scrutinizing and spend a little bit more time? We just don't know the answer to that yet. We don't know what the most effective way to evaluate it is. We're making progress, but I guess my answer is anywhere from 10 seconds to 3 minutes.
Okay, thank you. I see Doug has another question asking whether this is a testing that athletic trainers can be trained to perform.
Absolutely. I think that that is a path forward. I think that we're going to have to get a little bit more respect thrown toward the athletic trainers and show that they are capable and that they're part of this solution. It's going to be part of the evolutionary process.
Yeah, I think that's a struggle that the athletic trainers have felt throughout, is that they're not getting the sort of recognition or of their professional certifications and experience, and that this is something that they can do. But as anybody who's been around that space knows, they've got a whole variety of tasks that they're responsible for performing with their teams and their organizations. And so throwing another responsibility on top of them, not that they aren't able to do that, but at some point there's only so many hours in their day. And when they're managing high schools with hundreds and hundreds of athletes, and even in that case, many high schools don't even have an athletic trainer on staff. The data says it's about half that don't even have an athletic trainer.
Correct.
So,
I was just going to add, Doug, the pilot program I spoke of that we're doing this fall is going to be led by the athletic trainers. So I'll send me your email and I'll keep you posted on how that works.
do we have any other questions? People can jump in verbally or throw it in the chat, whatever's easier.
Not to put you on the spot, but Martha is the executive director of Parent Heart Watch. Martha, do you have anything to add?
No, I think you've covered pretty much everything. You've done a great job, Darren, and I just hope that we can engage more people in realizing that a lot can be done to change this paradigm, but it's going to take all of us working together.
And I think that's the interesting question that I always come back to is what can we do? What's the best way for those of us? Obviously, a number of the people on here are really deeply enmeshed in this space. But from those that are outside working with other sports organizations, working with governing bodies or schools, what's the best way for us to help?
So I think the best way to help is to start at what I see the beginning, which is education and awareness. I don't think many people would succeed walking into a school out of nowhere and saying, we have to do heart screenings on kids, because that's a big step. There's a lot involved. I think first we have to make sure that the administrators and the parents and the coaches and even the pediatricians, surprisingly, need to realize that sudden cardiac arrest isn't just an adult thing. They need to realize that there are warning signs. So Roy, you were talking about the concussion before. So sure, it's an obvious instance where something might result, a concussion might result from a blow to the head. But there are some warning signs too that get overlooked among parents and students. Fainting during or right after exercise is probably the gravest warning sign. A racing heart. We've had a family that told us that the son always used to complain that he felt like his heart was beating fast while he was watching TV. And mom said what most moms probably would say, that's because you drink too much soda. True, right? Like that can cause your heart to race. But I think what we have to do is realize that the warning signs that are out there, we shouldn't just keep blowing off. We shouldn't treat a lot of the things that happen on the courts and the fields with Gatorade and a 5-minute timeout. We need to start considering that our body might be telling us something. So I think, Roy, the first step is for all the groups that work with youth organizations is to start handing out literature that educates all the constituents about cardiac arrest, about the things to look out for. Because then once we have an educated population, then we're going to actually reverse the paradigm, and it's going to be the parents and coaches saying, wait a minute, you just told me that cardiac arrest isn't just an adult thing, and I just learned that an AED is the only tool that can save someone in cardiac arrest. We don't have an AED, we better get one. Or,
Right.
or you know, CPR is what keeps the blood moving. We got to make sure that all of our coaches and our students know how to do chest compressions. So even though that's a slower process, I think that is the best long-term plan.
Yeah, I think as you're describing the education process and getting that awareness, you're absolutely right. You can't walk into a school, we can't walk into Kayla's school and just show up and knock on the door and think that they're going to have a heart screening set up a week or a month later, because they don't understand that urgency and that need. And I think that those warning signs that you're describing, those early signs, the heart racing, things that shouldn't be ignored, I think that that's an area where we should figure out a collaboration of distributing that broadly to all of the youth sports organizations that we're engaged with, because it's something, as you said, people tend to blow off, for lack of a better term. And just like in the early days of the conversation about concussions, it was you had your bell rung, you were seeing stars, it was this or that, right? And there were things that people blew off because they didn't understand that that was really a sign that there's been some significant damage long term, short term, and that you've got to recognize those symptoms and behave differently. And I think, as you said, when the heart's racing and we don't have any great reason, because it hasn't been due to, you didn't just run a mile up a hill, right? You need to understand what else could trigger that. And maybe that's the easy starting point, is finding, with your help and working together, to create kind of that 5 or 10 item checklist to keep an eye on. And I'm sure it's out there, but my sense from dealing with many youth organizations, and I don't know if Lisa can hear me, I'm interested in her perspective as well, to talk about whether that's something that you've seen a lot of distribution, because in my experience, that's not something that I've seen a lot of conversation about.
Hi, sorry, let's see here. Can you hear me?
Yep, you're
Okay.
good.
Yep. Yeah, this is not, to my knowledge, a top issue amongst most youth organizations, because they don't need to get a heart, any heart testing until they get into middle school or high school sports. That's, at least that's in Maryland, through my kids' experience. So,
Lisa, are you finding that middle schools and high schools are doing heart testings or screenings?
no, they require that you go to a doctor and get it. So all of my children have had to go and get, well, they really haven't had to get heart screenings as much as just stress tests. So that's different, I know, but it's, they make them jump rope for a minute, and then they, test to see if they, what the heart rate is and if they hear any murmurs or anything like that. So I know it's completely different from EKG, but it's something. So
And that's a Maryland law?
Yeah, in order to play sports in middle school and high school.
Because I know in Illinois they have sport physicals, but you walk into Walgreens, they put you in that little clinic office, they take out a checklist, they ask you about 10 questions like, can you breathe? Can you see? Do you have a pulse? Can you move your fingers? Can you blink your eyes? And literally not a whole lot else of substance. Even when they put in the concussion laws and requirements, having done a lot of concussion work, I went in with my daughter just to see how they handled that. And we go through the whole thing, and she doesn't bring up concussions, and we're walking out the door, and I just turned back and asked if there wasn't supposed to be a concussion element to this. in terms of education. She's like, oh yeah, let me dig through this file cabinet and see if I can find up a crumpled form and hand it to you to just walk away with, and no real education. There was certainly nothing at all like a stress test in Illinois for that. Darren, I don't know what you've seen in Pennsylvania, Kayla in Wisconsin. I'm not aware of the stress test element being incorporated.
And just since you brought up concussions, at least in our high school, we have a baseline concussion every season. The students go in and get this baseline concussion testing. But we may be part of some study that I don't know about. But again, yeah, we do the stress testing that a doctor in the doctor's office has to do, and sign off on. And then we have this baseline testing that the school does.
Yeah, and we're going to have another session dedicated to concussions in a couple of weeks with Sports Brain, and we'll address more of the issues there. I don't want to take it away from the heart thing, but Darren, I'm interested to hear your thoughts in terms of what you've seen in other states. I know we're running up against the clock, so I appreciate everybody being with us. I think Darren can stay for a few more minutes if people want to finish up the conversations, and we can talk about that.
Yeah, Roy, I'll just wrap up by answering your question. I am not aware, and I would almost go as far as saying they are not. There is no state in the country that requires heart screenings. There is a county that I mentioned in Florida, I believe, too, that just started to require heart screenings. And it sounds like Lisa's doctor or network is doing a little bit more than others. So I think it's also important to point out that would be they would be listening to their hearts after they endure exercise, whereas a stress test in the cardiology space is when you actually get hooked up to an EKG and then have to run on a treadmill or ride a stationary bike. So we have a lot of ground to cover when it comes to checking and protecting the hearts of our kids. And I'll let you know that if you are involved with groups and you need collateral to share, check out our website. We have plenty of it, and we'll even throw your logo on it, so it looks like it's coming from you. And then finally, I want to plug something that we just announced today. It is called the Cpr Jukebox Marathon on March 8th for 12 hours. We are inviting students to join our Zoom conference and do compressions on balls. We are having students sign up in pairs. They'll each be responsible for a 10-minute block. And so by the end of the 12 hours, we will have done about 72,000 compressions and taught a bunch of people how to be lifesavers. So no prior experience is needed. And I'm sure that all of you know of a bored kid or two. So check out our website for that.
Darren, I want to thank you for coming on. It's been fantastic information, and I know we'll have a lot of people looking at this over the coming months. I appreciate your time. I want to thank everybody else for being here. One other announcement I want to make and encourage all of you to participate for fun. We launched the Sports Philanthropy Draft Challenge, so it's an interactive game around the NFL draft where you kind of make some picks about what teams are going to do, where they're going to draft, everything like that. I can send it out to everybody, just a little bit of fun and a side light to do something with the first kind of quote unquote live sporting event that we've had in a while. So I encourage you to participate and share it just for fun. We're going to have a celebrity leaderboard with athletes and other people that are going to have participated. So thank you all for being here. We hope that you will join us for some of the other webinars. The full list is on our site, sportsphilanthropynetwork.com/webinars. And again, you can look at all the other things that we have going on in terms of information from podcasts. And please make sure you reach out for resources if you need connections to somebody. You know, one of the values of becoming a member of our network and participating in everything we do is really the opportunity to connect and engage with lots of different groups. And we've made some great matches and organizations that are really good fits for each other that did not have another way to really find and work together. I love what Darren and Sheldon are doing. I know Sheldon really wishes he could be here. So his passion is immense, just like Darren's, for this space. And I appreciate Martha being on here, and Dave and other people that are really working to address this issue and want to see what we can do as a network to get this word and hammer home in a different way. Because as Darren said, it's really hard to walk in there and just kind of figuratively knock on the door and expect that people will say, yeah, great, let's run a screening. It's a lot of gatekeepers at schools. You end up with coaches, administrators, school nurses, the board, the district, parents, so many things that make it a challenge to get in those doors. And I encourage everybody to keep working, as Darren said, to keep being a pain in the ass as much as possible, because that's a lot less harmful than seeing kids die unnecessarily when that defect could have been discovered earlier and addressed, as well as the fact, aside from anything else, of the AED training and resources, so that really is available. And it clearly works in a lot of environments without a lot of training or experience. And so it's something to get out there, and that's something I'd like to see us address as well, in terms of getting more of those units available. So I know we've kept everybody way over what we normally like to do, but Darren had so much good information there. The slides that Darren had will be posted along with the video. That'll be up on our blog later tonight, so you'll be able to share that with anybody that didn't have an opportunity to be here. Thank you all again for coming. Darren, thank you for the presentation. And on behalf of Kayla and myself and the Sports Philanthropy Network, would really like to thank you all for being here and participating. Have a great
Thanks,
day.
everybody.